Tickets are now on sale for Rebels of Disclosure 2025, May 12th through the 15th in Grafton, Illinois at the beautiful Pierre Marquette Lodge and Conference Center. Make sure you take advantage of the early bird specials before Black Friday. This will be a 4-day event with 12 speakers covering topics such as ET contact, experiencer testimonies, lost history, secret space programs, time travel, Illuminati, parallel realities, and so much more. Visit journeytotruth.online for more details. Make sure to grab your ticket today before the early bird special ends on Black Friday. We hope to see you there.
That's no moon. It's a space station.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Just a quick announcement before we get started. For one, tickets are on sale for our conference. As you know, make sure you take advantage of the early bird special. That link is below. It ends on Black Friday. It's a great deal, and we hope to see you there. I know you guys just watched the commercial for it, so I'm not going to repeat all that information, but tickets are selling, and if you want to make it, you better grab one quick. And also we have a promo code, a special promo code for Hopewell Farm CBD right now. It ends on the 11th, and it's 15% off all of their products with promo code LIGHTWINDS. And that lasts until the 11th, so take advantage of that. They have amazing products. It's my favorite CBD. Their topical ointment is great as well. So make sure you take advantage of that promo code LIGHTWINDS. That link is below in the description. Today's guest is Andrew Collins. He is an author, but more importantly, a frequent guest on Ancient Aliens. He's been on for years now and actually still currently recording episodes with them. And he just wrote this book, Karahan Tepe. Is that how I say that?
That'll do. Yeah.
That'll do. Okay.
Close enough.
So, Civilization of the Annunaki and the Cosmic Origins of the Serpent of Eden. And it potentially dates older than Gobekli Tepe, and which is really interesting because that's, at least as far as mainstream goes, it's the oldest dated civilization or megalith that we know of. And then this one apparently is older. And I really appreciate Hugh Newman's forward to the book, In Quest of a Super Civilization. I really like that. So we're talking about a very advanced civilization that lived in the past. And you've been at this for quite a while, so I'm going to turn it over to you and let you, introduce yourself and maybe let our audience know how you even found your way into this field and your introduction into Ancient Aliens and all of that, and we'll just go from there. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yes, it's a long story, but I'll try and keep it short. I suppose my interest in, let's say, Gobekli Tepe and what I would call the first post-Ice Age civilization really began in the mid-1990s. I was researching the legends and myths relating to the Watchers and the Nephilim of Hebrew tradition. I was looking at the idea of the Watchers being like these rebel angels that were said to have come down from a mountain called Hermon and to have taken mortal wives, and they revealed to their mortal wives the arts and sciences of heaven. And they're also said to have, obviously mated with them, and from this union came these giant babies called Nephilim. And I was looking at all of this and thinking, these angels, they can't be incorporeal, as most people would assume angels to be. They have to be flesh and blood human beings of some kind. And I started to realize that maybe they were the prime movers, maybe even some kind of shamanic elite behind the foundation of civilization itself, which we know, according to Hebrew myth, took place in an area known as Eden. Obviously, we know about the Garden of Eden. And this was said to be where the 4 rivers of paradise take their rise. and all four of those rivers can be seen to rise in eastern Turkey. They're the Tigris rivers, the Euphrates, the Artsis River, and also the Greater Zab, which actually flows eventually into the Tigris. And all of them basically rise from the same general area. And so I started focusing on that and thinking, can we find evidence of high civilization there? So a lot of firsts for humanity took place in the area. The first animal domestication, the first agriculture, the first use of metals, the first rectilinear buildings and stuff like this. I mean, I could recognize this, but clearly we were missing something. So, I was writing all this down in a book called From the Ashes of Angels. The other point was that the Sumerian variant, if you like, of the Watchers were known as the Annunaki. They were said to be the builder gods of the Mesopotamian civilization. It was they who gave us the first buildings, instructed us on how to build irrigation ditches. They gave us the first agriculture and animal husbandry, according to the legends. And I began to realize that the Anunnaki was simply another name for the Watchers. And there were other variations of these similar sort of mythical beings, if you like, in other parts of the Near East, in Armenia, in Iran, for instance, and in later cultures that occupied Turkey. But all of them seem to point towards the same thing, and that was that there was some kind of genesis of civilization in Eastern Turkey. So I wrote this book. Graham Hancock gave it a testimonial. It was published in 1996. It reached number 26 in the Times bestseller list of all books for a few weeks. Well, certainly for the first week. I think it dropped down after that. But, it did really well. But what I didn't know is that at the very time that I was writing this book, during the dark nights of 1995, during the day, the first spades were going into the ground at this site called Gobekli Tepe, which, I'm sure most of your viewers will be aware of. And of course, once this was released to the general public in the year 2000, and when I saw it, I thought, well, there you go. There's your mother lode for what might be described as the first post Ice Age civilization, because I'd said in the book that I felt that all of this emerged at the end of the last Ice Age and kickstarted the Neolithic Revolution. And here was the evidence. You had this incredible structure, or no, series of structures that essentially looked like nothing on Earth that had ever been found before. So, of course, I wanted to go out there. And my opportunity didn't really come until the year 2004, when, 2 years after this book had been published in Turkey, I was invited to a big cultural festival at Diyarbakir, right in the heart of the area. And I said, could I see some of these sites whilst I'm there? So I was given a driver and an interpreter. And we went to Gobekli Tepe for the first time. I mean, staying on that for a moment, when I looked at it, I mean, it just blew my head off, really, because I was looking at stuff which was so alien. I mean, and I mean that on a terrestrial sense as opposed to an extraterrestrial sense, that the only comparison that I could make was with temples and carvings and art that you might find in South America, places like Peru, Colombia, and perhaps even Central America, with the Olmecs and whatever. I mean, it didn't look like anything that you might see in Egypt or Babylon or the Indus Valley or Iran. This was something entirely unique. I mean, possibly based on the fact that it was at least 11,000 years old. And this was confirmed dates by that time. That alone blew my head. But I went to an ancient city nearby called Haran, which features in the Bible, was said to be the place of the Chaldeans or the Sabians, who were basically the creators of astronomy and astrology. And whilst I was there, these little kids came up to me and wanted to sell me this second-hand guidebook of the local area. And I sort of gave them a few quid for it and looked at it, and right at the back was a picture of one of these T-pillars, like you see at Gobekli Tepe, but this one was clearly not there. It was a place called Karahan Tepe. And I looked at this, and it had this snake going down the side of it. I thought, this looks really, really interesting. I need to find this place. So within a couple of days, I was in the area of this site, which was the very remote Tek Mountains, which is about 25 miles to the southeast of Gobekli Tepe, driving around, just aimlessly driving around, trying to find this site. And eventually, a guy on a tractor just pointed in a direction. We eventually ended up at this farmhouse, and a little boy came out who talked to our interpreter and just pointed south. And there was this limestone hill there, and this was Karahan Tepe. And I walked towards it, and as I did so, I started to see stone tools all over the place. I mean, I'd seen the same thing at Gobekli Tepe on the floor because, by the way, there was no roads to Gobekli Tepe at that time. We had to walk across hills and valleys to get there. And I was seeing these same stone tools now. And they got more and more frequent the closer I got to the hill, until there were hundreds, if not thousands of them everywhere, which showed clearly there was an awful lot of human activity at the site. But also I could see that the T-pillars just sticking out of the ground. And also there were like these right-angled fragments of what they call porthole stones just lying about. And these were entrances into now lost stone enclosures, like you see at Gobekli Tepe. And there were various other things there, which all told me that it's quite clear that Karahan Tepe is the next big thing. It's the sister site of Gobekli Tepe, and presumably one day it will be excavated. And from that point onwards, in 2004, so that's 20 years ago, I visited it on many occasions, exploring every possible part of it, including a northern hill. There's two hills at Karahan Tepe. There's the southern hill and the northern hill. The northern hill has a whole series of very strange caves cut into it, some of which I am certain go back at least 11,000 years and, were used by shamans or whatever. And I explored them, often in the company of my good friend, Hugh Newman. And then in 2018, I was there and we heard that the University of Istanbul was about to do a survey in preparation for the start of excavations in 2019. And so, that seemed to be good news. But then everything went quiet, really, until 2021, when suddenly what they discovered during these excavations was revealed, and it just blew my mind. I mean, it was almost like they had uncovered a lost city of the Annunaki. Basically, it was this vast area of interconnected stone enclosures, some of which were cut directly out of the bedrock into the side of this limestone hill, Karahan Tepe, and constitute the earliest known rock architecture anywhere in the world. I mean, obviously, when you think of rock architecture, you think of the churches in Ethiopia, you think of Hindu temples in India, for instance, but this was many, many thousands of years older. And so my mind immediately started looking at the overhead images that were coming out of Karahan Tepe, trying to work out if there was any kind of alignments or anything, and just wanting to know what was going on here, what really it was all about. And I quickly realized that one of these new enclosures was aligned towards sunset at the time of the summer solstice. And I was looking at that and I sort of clicked round the time until 2 hours later when it got dark. And I realized that if you were looking at exactly the same spot from the same position towards the horizon, you would see the Milky Way rising vertically up in the sky from an area known as the Galactic Bulge, which is the very center of our own Milky Way galaxy, around which you've got some really important constellations, including Sagittarius, Ophiuchus, the 13th sign of the zodiac, known as the serpent bearer or the serpent holder or the snake charmer, and also the stars of Scorpius. And although we know Scorpius as a scorpion, in many ancient cultures around the world, it was also a snake. So there was a whole load of snake imagery going on here. So that seemed to fit the fact that at Karahan Tepe, it's covered in snakes. There's snakes everywhere. And it's obvious that they have this strong interest in snakes. I'm beginning to think to myself, maybe they were venerating some kind of cosmic snake, a snake to do with the sky. And maybe it was something to do with this area of the sky that was associated with this, this enclosure we call the pit shrine structure AA. So that then became my project as we move forward. But just a couple of months later, Hugh Newman and his partner JJ Ainsworth actually went out to Karahan Tepe. I wasn't able to go until the following year, but they went out there. And they went there specifically on the winter solstice. And what they discovered was that a beam of light comes down through this large elliptical enclosure, which we call the Great Ellipse. They call it structure AD, penetrates through this small porthole window and illuminates this incredible giant stone head on the western wall of one of the shrines there called the Pillar Shrine, structure AB. Out of which out the floor of which you've got 10 incredible stone pillars, quite literally cut out of the bedrock, and an 11th one that's been brought in and stuck in the ground. But on the west side of this same enclosure, which is I think it's about 22, 23 feet long. I could be slightly out on the size there. You've got this huge human head on the end of a sorry, shit. That's my alarm going off from. No, I was
No worries.
in readiness for 6 o'clock. Sorry, we'll have to go back one. Okay.
It was illuminating the human head. You said it was a huge human head.
Yeah. All right. Let's say. And the sun was illuminating this giant. The sun was illuminating this giant human head on the west wall of this shrine, and this was something that they discovered, and has become essentially a sort of symbol of the earliest use of an alignment to illuminate the interior of a building, something like you would find at places like Newgrange, the Passage Grave in Ireland, or Stonehenge in Britain. This was going on at least 9000 BC. So, we're gradually building up a picture of what's happening at Karahan Tepe. But for me, my interest is not so much how they built things, but why. In other words, what was going on in the minds of these people. So I began to focus really on what this cosmic serpent may be that was associated with the galactic bulge, the very center of our galaxy. Now, the galactic bulge is something that, to be honest, if we look up in the sky today, we probably won't see. But in the past, without any kind of light pollution, it was arguably one of the brightest areas of the night sky.
Right.
And it would have been almost like a sort of light bulb. And many ancient cultures saw this in terms of the head of some kind of creature, most obviously a snake in the sky, with the snake itself being the Milky Way. And as soon as I realized that, I thought, this is it. This is what these people were into. They were seeing the Milky Way as a snake, what many ancient cultures referred to as a world encircling snake. They believed it completely encircled, the known world, and existed within what was known as the cosmic ocean. This was almost like this celestial ocean that existed outside of the physical universe itself. And that this snake had brought into manifestation the universe itself and created the world. Sometimes it's referred to as a demiurge, a creator of the world, something that's very familiar from Gnostic traditions, for instance. But it's also found in many other cultures around the world. It's present in Vedic tradition in India. It's there in North American tradition. It's there in Mayan tradition. It's there in certain South American cultures as well. So this is something that's universal. and very clearly goes back an awful long way into the past. And there it is at Karahan. And I think that this helps explain why there is just so much snake imagery there, including the fact that the pillar shrine, the one where you have these bedrock pillars coming out of the ground, I was looking at this and I was showing pictures of it during one of our tours that we do to Turkey. And we'd asked the audience what they thought about Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. And one of the ladies, sort of said, is it possible that the overhead image of this shrine could represent a human sperm? Because out the back of it, you have this deep groove that is suggestive of almost like a body or tail that's sort of like winding away. And I said to her, no, I don't think that's possible, because obviously these people didn't have microscopes, so they wouldn't have known what a human sperm looked like unless it was something intuitive. But then I thought, well, hold on. What if it's not a sperm, but an actual snake? What if that shrine was deliberately created in the shape of the head and indeed the mouth of a snake, so that when you went inside it, you were actually going inside the mouth of this snake, which obviously then begs the question of why you'd want to do that in the first place. And I concluded that the idea was perhaps to be quite literally eaten or consumed, certainly on a symbolic level, by the snake, to become a part of its DNA, if you really want to put it that way. And in doing so, you actually become the snake yourself. That links you not just to a mundane snake, but the cosmic snake in the sky, almost like some kind of celestial being, an entity which could be evoked inside the human body. And of course, why would you do that? Well, for oracular communication, to experience, some kind of celestial intelligence, become a part of it, and to bring back information into the community itself, which might take the form of cosmic knowledge and wisdom, oracular communications, instructions on how to better your society or community or whatever. I think that something like this was going on. This is what the shamans were actually doing at Karahan Tepe.
Right. So much there to unpack. There is, we like to kind of push the boundaries on this show of, what was possible or what happened. And so you don't believe these people had access to technology like microscopes and stuff. It certainly doesn't seem like it if you, look at it through our current 3D perspective. But, we're talking ancient aliens here. So do you believe that this could have been a civilization from somewhere else in the galaxy? And
no, I don't think so. No. I mean, this was, sort of earthborn, if you like. But if we want to look in terms of, celestial intelligences, all of that can be going on inside the mind itself. Our consciousness becoming at one with a cosmic consciousness or a cosmic intelligence. And this is something that we achieve through altered states of consciousness. There's some evidence that they may well have been using hallucinogens, whether it be mushrooms, whether it be plants, including DMT, or anything else which we are not aware of at this time. But certainly altered states is a very necessary process involved with shamanism. And this is what I think that they were doing there. They would be entering these death trances, if you like. And during this time, they would be leaving the body and communicating with otherworldly intelligences. Now, we can't say what those intelligences really were. I mean, they could be extraterrestrial. They could be extra-dimensional. They could be from another world, or it could be some kind of singular consciousness that we refer to today as God. And what's so interesting, of course, is that these people seem to have been focusing on an area of the sky that corresponds with galactic center, the very center of the Milky Way galaxy. And what's there? We know today that there is a supermassive black hole, which the astronomers referred to as Sagittarius A star. And theories have been put forward, particularly by the great free thinker of our age, Rupert Sheldrake, suggesting that this supermassive black hole could itself be an entity. It's an intelligence in its own right that is almost looking after its own clock. In other words, the galaxy around it that it has created through the matter that it's spewed out to form the different star systems and planets and everything else within that galaxy. And I find that a very, very interesting idea, because it therefore becomes possible that the people at Karahan Tepe were communicating with a genuine cosmic being, and that they were focusing on the very same area of the sky where that being was almost certainly placed, from a spatial point of view.
Interesting. So let me bring this idea to the table. I read this book called Jaguar Hope, and it's about these ancient civilizations going on these journeys, right? These psychedelic journeys and stuff. And they mention in that the way they would travel astrally is through what they would call the serpent ropes, and AKA the cosmic web. But they repeatedly referred to it as the serpent ropes. So I wonder if the serpent in these ancient sites is referencing a cosmic web, a portal system, if you will, that these star people, these galactic civilizations would actually travel through, or whenever they went on their journeys, they would travel through these serpent ropes and go places and encounter extraterrestrials or whatever it is, interdimensional beings. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but it might explain why the serpent shows up so much. Maybe that's what they viewed the cosmic web as, these serpent ropes.
I've never heard that term before, but we certainly have things like Birkeland currents, which are energy vortices that are associated with one place and connect with another place in the cosmos. We don't really understand too much about them, but they could be the makings of what we refer to as portals. And sorry, it's firework night outside, so we're getting fireworks going off all the time. I'll just go back one. What we do know about is these Birkeland currents. Now, but they connect 2 points, within the upper atmosphere of planets, and quite clearly will carry energy from one point to the other. And very likely they could be associated with what we refer to today, as portals. And portals, I think, are very much linked with location. There are certain areas on the planet where paranormal phenomena, UFOs, cryptids, strange encounters with weird beings occur on a more frequent basis than any other. And, obviously somewhere like Skinwalker Ranch is an obvious example, but that's just one. They exist probably in every country of the world. And what we know about these locations is that they're very often associated with intense geology. And that geology generally revolves around everything from tectonic plates moving to fault lines, to certain types of minerals like, metal ores, iron, copper, mercury, stuff like this, that seem to be able to create the right electrical or ionospheric environments for plasma to manifest. And plasma has been found to contain an extra dimension of space, and therefore allows almost like a step-up process into a higher dimensional environment. And I think that once that you could connect with that, whether it be simply through consciousness or through physicality, then it allows you a connection with other places outside of the location to which you start. Now, that could be another place on our planet. It could be somewhere on another planet. It could be somewhere in a parallel world. but I think that these locations are particularly important for this type of communication. Now, have we got something similar, at Gobekli Tepe or Karahan Tepe? Well, we certainly know that at Gobekli Tepe, it's at the southern edge of the Taurus Mountains. And this is a well-known hotspot for UFOs. And that very strange things have gone on in the area of Karahan Tepe. I mean, I was there in March and entered into some caves with the owner of the land, who fervently believed that they were haunted by jinn. Now, these are, evil spirits in Arabic tradition. And basically he wouldn't even allow us into the, one of these caves unless we proved to him that we believed in a higher power. Literally, I mean, it didn't matter what, whether it be God, Allah, some other, primary deity or something like that. But he said that if you don't believe in it, the jinn can get you. So, we somehow convinced him. He took us in, and he fervently believed there was a jinn in there. And he did a whole ritual to try and appease this jinn, which involved him kissing the ground, kissing the dirt, picked up dirt that we all had to kiss and pass on. And, eventually we came out of there and he was elated that, nobody had got hurt or whatever. Now, this is anecdotal, but what's so interesting is that we then went down to his house, which was below the hill, enjoyed some hospitality, and then the winds whipped up. It was sunset. We felt we had to leave. And we came back down the track and, got in the car. And just as we were about to leave, we saw this figure standing above the caves. Now, we'd been there for hours beforehand. There'd been no one up there. Just one local youth had come up to see what was going on. He was just wearing normal clothes, probably a shepherd's boy or something. And it's a really remote area, by the way, incredibly remote. And we saw this figure on the hill. Well, one of my friends took 4 photographs, 2 of which were zoomed up. And what these revealed, and, I could show you these, or you can slot them in afterwards, was what is quite clearly something absolutely bizarre, a figure completely shrouded in cloth, which looks very much like a classical image of a jinn. And we contacted the owner of the farm, and it's on his land, remember, and asked him whether he recognized this figure. And he said, no, not whatsoever. We said, could it be a jinn? Obviously you believe in them. And he said, yes. And this image is completely inexplicable. And, it wasn't just one picture. There were 4 pictures of it. Plus I took 2. But my camera was so crap that that all you can see is just a faint image. But on a brand new iPhone, it looks perfect, basically. So what I'm trying to get at here is that paranormal phenomena clearly takes place in these areas, particularly around Karahan Tepe. So yes, of course, this could be almost like a sort of ancient portal, and that the communications that they were making with these cosmic intelligences were much stronger here than, say, somewhere else in the region.
Wow. So I'll ask one more question and I'll let Aaron jump in. But I'm thinking of this show called The Gift on Netflix. It's surrounded, the whole premise of the show is Gobekli Tepe. Yeah. And within the cave under Gobekli Tepe, they discover a portal to a parallel world. And it's really interesting that, they built a whole show around that, a show plot around that. And I do think there is something to these ancient sites being connected with some sort of portal system like that. And it might explain a lot, and I appreciate that the conversation is going that direction, because it needs to. We have to kind of get off the ground here, I think, with some of these narratives, and start, introducing new ideas instead of trying to squeeze new information into the old narrative, so I really appreciate that we're able to do that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, firstly, going back to The Gift, which in Turkish was called Ataya. That TV series was based on novels that in turn were partly inspired by a book I wrote called Gobekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods.
Oh,
I actually
nice.
spoke with the author of those books via an interpreter, on well, it wasn't Zoom at the time. I think it was Skype or whatever. And yeah, she admitted it basically. So, that was based on one of my books. I mean, obviously not all of it, of course, but, certainly ideas were inspired. So, yeah, but I think we have to be careful, though. We have to look for proper anatomical evidence. And what we can say about Gobekli Tepe is that a study was done there looking firstly at its acoustics. And what I discovered was that the shape of the enclosures there had been very specifically, fine-tuned with a 3:4 ratio. And this was found in 4 different enclosures. And 3:4 ratio is often used if you want to create a building where you can project voice, basically, even in the theatres created in India today. There's a textbook that says, make them in a 3:4 ratio. I mean, I quote this in my books. But the study that was done there that showed that there was possibly advanced acoustics there also found that there were electromagnetic anomalies or geomagnetic anomalies inside one of the main enclosures there, enclosure D. And those anomalies obviously, we're not strong enough to create sparks and plasma flying, but they might have been enough to affect human consciousness, to allow it to more easily not just go into a trance state, but also to connect with otherworldly intelligences. So in other words, these sites could very easily have been chosen due to the energy levels actually at the sites. And of course, so we got that at Gobekli, we've got that at Karahan. And I've looked at things like the fault lines, the geology of the area, and it seems to make sense. But it is work that's ongoing, of course.
right. What are these rumors I'm hearing of Gobekli Tepe potentially being filled back in to preserve it? Is there any weight to that?
Yeah, this is the Jimmy Corsetto videos that have been put out. The honest answer to that is that there's some evidence for what's going on, but it's been put out of all proportion, in all honesty. I mean, let me explain. Firstly, the idea that Gobekli Tepe, no work will go on for the next 150 years, it's all being shelved, not true. Firstly, they are excavating various of the enclosures that have already been uncovered. Plus, next year, they are opening brand new areas of the site. But having said that, this is news that's only come out in the past, couple of months. So it is possible that the Jimmy Corsetto videos have actually triggered them into doing these new excavations. So, that could be very important. The other thing about concrete being used on the site, the only concrete is where they put these huge pylons in to hold up the roofs of the roof that's over the top of the main enclosures. Yeah, there's some concrete there, but they said, there's concrete roads. Those roads are completely away from the site. They're not on the tepe. A tepe is an artificial mound. In the case of Gobekli Tepe, it's about 300 yards by 200 yards by about 50 feet high. And there's no concrete there. So that's not quite right. The other thing about the trees being planted there to try and stop excavations, that's not true either. They were planted by the family that owns the land around 2004. And the reason that they did that was very, very practical, because they realized that eventually they'd have to sell that land to the authorities so that excavations would take place. And in Turkish law, if land has trees on it, particularly those of a specific type, and this is olive trees, then they are worth much more than simply ploughed land. As much as 10 times more than if you just have, plowed land or flat land or, pastures or whatever. And so that was done as a practical thing. So, that's the truth of the matter. I mean, the whole connections with the Dogos company, who definitely are a member of the World Economic Forum. I mean, they were the company that supplied, can't remember how much it was now, something like 12 to 15 million euros to create a whole visitor center, the roofs, the minibuses, the websites at Gobekli Tepe, that's made it into a major tourist attraction, very much like Stonehenge, although unfortunately to get in there now, they charge about 26 euros. Whereas in the past, when I first went there, it was free, obviously. I mean, they're a member of World Economic Forum, but, hey, so is Coca-Cola, Google, and many other large companies. And Dogos are a huge oil-based company in Turkey. So the World Economic Forum have taken an interest in Göbekli, obviously, because it's a symbol of the foundations of civilization. They even created like an ice model of it for one of their meetings at Davos in Switzerland. But I don't necessarily think that there's a huge conspiracy involved there.
Thank you for clarifying that. And that makes a lot of sense with
Yeah.
the trees. I know even here in certain states, like in Florida, for example, the oak tree, you actually, if you cut down one of the oak trees, you could pay a $2,000 fine. It's a native tree and it's sacred to the land. And I just learned this earlier this year, but people pay a lot of money for those trees, especially if it's on your property. And Aaron, did you want to add anything to this or have any thoughts about everything that's been said?
Well, the only thing I can say is that obviously these olive trees have now grown into huge orchards, and they will be damaging the archaeology below. I mean, there's no question that the roots will be burrowing deep. So they really need to get rid of them, soon, particularly if they do want to open up new areas on the site. Because at the moment they grow to the west of the current excavations. They grow to the north of them, a little bit to the east. So, it's quite a large area, including the highest spot on the actual mound itself. So I do feel they need to be moved if you really want to know what's going on at Göbekli Tepe. But in contrast, at Karahan Tepe, they are digging as fast as they possibly can, because Göbekli Tepe is under the control of the German Archaeological Institute, in association with the Şanlıurfa Archaeological Museum. They're the ones in charge of the excavations, whereas at Karahan Tepe, it's purely an institutional thing, controlled by the University of Istanbul under the leadership of a archaeologist named Necmi Karol. So it's completely different. So they're going as fast as they possibly can. I mean, they're uncovering huge areas, even since when I first saw the pictures in 2021. I mean, they're uncovering incredible stuff, including this massive enclosure and on the actual top of the hill itself that was buried, that is perfectly aligned to the constellation of Cygnus, the celestial bird of vulture, that was seen as the point of entry and exit to the sky world. And a big vulture statue was actually found right by the altar, perfectly aligned to its corresponding sky figure in the sky, and a huge statue by the side of it that's 7.5 feet tall, that is in a sitting position. So, I mean, it's like a statue that's seated. So if you created that statue to stand up, it would have to be at least 9 feet tall, which is extraordinary and really does show that we're dealing with giants. And of course, this brings us on to the question of the Annunaki. Who are the Annunaki? Well, as I mentioned earlier, they're mentioned in Sumerian myths and in Babylonian myths. In Babylonian myths, they're called the Annunaki. Now, that means, essentially, it means the gods of sky and earth. But the original term for the Annunaki was the Annuna. And this means essentially those of the sky, or quite simply the sky people. Now, obviously, some of our friends might want to interpret that as that they were, space beings that came down here 500,000 years ago, to create humans, to mine in South Africa, and take the gold off planet to Nibiru. That's fine. But for me, I believe that the Anunnaki, are the memory of the prime movers behind the creation of this post-civilization. Sorry, this post-ice age civilization, which they today want to refer to as Tash Tepela. Tash means basically stone, the builders in stone, and Tepela meaning those of these tepes, that these are artificial mounds. And therefore, were the Anunnaki or the Annuna, these people, were they these giants that of legend? And what I show in my books, including the one that you've got there, is that the people behind the creation of Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe probably came from the north, and beyond that, eastwards as far as Siberia and Mongolia. So what was happening out there? Well, as far back as 30 to 40 to 50,000 years ago, there was a distant cousin of humanity called the Denisovans. We know that they were of enormous size, possibly the giants of legend, and they were incredibly sophisticated. They created this beautiful jewelry. Just look up the Denisovan bracelet. It's this beautiful, polished bangle that's got a hole drilled through it. The feed rate of that drill is so fast, it's comparable to a modern day drill. They created the first bone needles, which they were clearly using to create tailored clothing. They created the first bone instruments. They were the first people to watch the stars and create number systems relating to it. They may even have ridden horses 40, 50,000 years ago, based on the discovery of horse DNA inside a place called the Denisovan Cave, which is where a lot of the information relating to them is coming out today. Now, they died out, possibly, say 30, 40,000 years ago. However, by this time, we'd interbred with them. So we were carrying not only their DNA, their genes, but also their legacy with us. The other thing they created was stone tools, which formed a toolkit that was used throughout the Paleolithic period, all the way down to the time of Gobekli Tepe. And you can trace the evolution of those stone tools from Siberia and Mongolia all the way down to Gobekli Tepe. So, I think that this is where we should be looking for, Graham Hancock's lost civilization, basically. Not necessarily Atlantis, which is what a lot of people talk about, simply because we haven't really got any firm evidence of Atlantis. We can place it somewhere out in the Atlantic. I did a whole book where I associated it with the area of the Bahamas and the Caribbean, but really we haven't got enough to really say that we found Atlantis. So the idea that we may have inherited a lot of our ideas from highly advanced ancient cousins, like the Denisovans or indeed the Neanderthals, I don't think is a mad idea. I think that we should be looking towards that. The idea, obviously, of ancient aliens is something that we should continue to look at. However, we need anatomical evidence. We can't just look at paintings on walls and assume that they show rocket ships. That's not good enough. We have to look for firm evidence of contact with any kind of extraterrestrial source. Carl Sagan, the great cosmologist, astronomer, free thinker, wrote a paper in the early 1960s where he concluded that contact with extraterrestrial intelligences was inevitable in the past, and that we should even be looking towards, let's say, the Mesopotamian ancient texts for account. So, in fact, this was probably where Zecharia Sitchin got his ideas from, relating to the Anunnaki being space beings. But we've got to keep our feet on the ground all the time.
Right. So you're saying these giants that potentially died out 30, 40,000 years ago were in the Mongolia region?
Yeah.
That would align with Tartaria, if you're familiar with Tartaria, that used to be on the ancient maps. It's not anymore, but there were alleged giants that come from that region. So that aligns with that civilization. Aaron, did you have any questions for him?
Man, I mean, there's a million directions I could go. That's a big swath of information we're covering. So I'll just say this. I just got back from a trip to Peru actually a few weeks ago, and we went to Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo and all the, a bunch of sites there, and it was amazing. With Mike Collins from Wandering Wolf, who's good friends with Graham Hancock. He just interviewed him actually. Um, and then last year
with Gary from Neurotic.
Oh yeah.
I was with them doing their Forbidden Frontier a few days ago. Yeah.
Oh, nice, awesome. Yeah, they're both awesome. Yeah. And Nikki Anna Jones, who not many people know about. So it's one thing to like look at pictures of all this stuff and do research on it, but when you go there in person, you're seeing it with your own eyes, you're feeling the energy. It was just it's a whole nother level. And to me, it's like clearly obvious this stuff is, for one, way older than we're being told by the mainstream, and two, built by very advanced civilizations that we can't replicate it today. Like you're going to Machu Picchu and you're seeing these megalithic stones that are upwards of 150 tons or more, that are all the way up this mountain and there's seamless, just there's no mortar used. It's just all different shapes and sizes, all fit perfectly together. There's just so many things, and all these sites. And then you see the stuff that was built like on top of it or next to it later on, that looks like something you would expect something 800 years ago to be, look like. But then, clearly like they just settled on top of this much older land, which happens all over the planet. You see these much older ancient sites that are clearly, to me, built by these super, much more advanced civilizations that then later on they're on these energetic spots and they're built on top of because of those reasons later on. And yeah, I went to Egypt last year with a tour led by Carrie Cassidy and Maria Wheatley also, and that was incredible as well. And again, you're seeing all this stuff that's like clearly built, it's way older and it's built by advanced civilizations. And there's giants shown in Egypt in a lot of the hieroglyphs and things where you're seeing figures that are much taller than all the other figures around them. So, it's like they're showing you, they're showing you the truth basically, and a lot of this stuff. And then it gets written off as myth and legend and metaphor and things like that. But what's your opinion on, obviously, I know you've studied a lot of this stuff, you've written books. What would be your best, if somebody who is wanting to know about this stuff in terms of what's the best proof of advanced civilizations in the past, in the ancient past, what would you point them towards?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't, you can go no better than reading Graham Hancock's books, I think. I mean, obviously, I recommend my own, of course, but Graham is a good benchmark of good research, and I'm so glad that he's there. I mean, I don't agree with everything that Graham writes. He knows that. We both supported each other for over 30 years, but he's a clever man, and what he writes, I think, is roughly where it's at. In other words, there are so many books that are written that say mad things, but the problem is that if people assume that particular writer or that particular influencer on YouTube or whatever is correct, then they'll just accept that as the truth. And that's one thing that people should not do. But the one thing I can say is that Graham certainly knows his stuff. He's a perfect person to start in this area. I mean, he raises the right questions. I think that's important. Right. Obviously you talked about Peru and Bolivia. Yes, of course, there are evidence. There's evidence there of, advanced civilizations prior to the Incas. I mean, the Incas were basically only up and running for something like 100 years before,
Right.
the Spanish conquistadors came along. So could they have created all of these incredible monuments at places like Machu Picchu and Ollantaytambo, Sacsayhuaman, obviously Cuzco itself, etc., etc.? Well, they were simply building upon what was already there. And there was an advanced technology, a lost technology involved with those. But of course, the other thing you have to be careful of, even if, let's say, the huge, great blocks of Sacsayhuaman are older than the meager blocks of that above them of the Inca, it's a case of how old. It could just be a few hundred years. It could be many thousands of years. We don't know. So, we have to leave that as an open question.
Right.
And it's the same with, let's say huge polygonal walls, other parts of the world. We don't know how old they are. I mean, I've looked at them, for instance, in Turkey, at Hittite sites. They do seem to be older than the Hittites, which dates to around 1500 to about 1200 BC. But how old, we don't know. They probably relate to the previous culture that was there, known as the Hatti. So they probably go back to 2500, maybe 3000 BC. So, you have to look at things sensibly. I mean, the one thing that we can say is that Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe are at least 11 to 12,000 years old. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
That means that they were creating beautiful architecture with cut and dressed blocks, beautiful carved art, sophisticated portable objects, beads and other things as well at this time. And therefore, if you take, let's say, 9000 BC and then come all the way down to, let's say, 3000 BC, when you get Stonehenge being built, or just after that, the Great Pyramid, that's 6,000 years to perfect your art. That's a hell of a long time. So we know what they were doing in 9000 BC. So 6,000 years later, they perfected it. It's like us today. I mean, we're obviously perfecting the art of computers and digital technology and whatever. Look how fast we've advanced in just a matter of 50 to 70 years. What are we going to be like in 6,000 years' time? Do you see what I'm saying? So we have to keep this is what I say about keeping your feet on the ground. I mean, just because you see a nice polished wall and there's some dodgy stuff above it doesn't necessarily therefore mean that that what's below is thousands of years older. I mean, it could be the fact that that you've got a decorated wall and the top wall, because it's much higher, it's easier to build because you're creating a temple on top or something like that. So just think for yourself. Don't just believe what people say, but check it out for yourself and come to your own conclusions. I think that's what the message I'd like to get across there.
Right. But the other thing is that it clearly, to me, looks like two different civilizations built, though, because they're completely different styles. So then the question is, what happened to the previous civilization?
Well, that's a good question.
Where did they go? What happened to them? What were they about? And then two, how did they build it? Because we can't even explain really how it was built. We can't replicate it today.
I mean, on Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse, Series 2, obviously he talks about places like Sacsayhuaman and other incredible sites like the Temple of the Moon.
I was at both of those
in there.
It's a few weeks ago.
You go inside the Temple of the Moon. I've been inside it myself. I will be again there next year. And it does look like there is some kind of vitrification has taken place. In other words, that the stone has reached such a heat that it's quite literally melted. We could be dealing with some kind of geopolymer formula. Although I'll be honest, I'm a little bit skeptical of all of that. And I think it needs a lot more experimentation to try and prove that geopolymer existed. I mean, even though we know that Gobekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, and similar sites, they were using a form of geopolymer there known as terrazzo, which is where you heat up limestone to anything up to, I think, 800 degrees. I'm going to go Fahrenheit as opposed to centigrade. And it then crumbles to dust, and you can then mix it and create like a sort of form of concrete. But that's different to suggesting that, let's say, you can melt granite and then, reconstruct it in the same type of form as you started with. I think that's much more difficult, to be honest.
Right.
What you might be able to do is put something over the surface of rocks so that it melts the outside of it to create an effect that's like vitrification. And we certainly know from Britain there are what's known as vitrified faults, particularly in Scotland, where the outer banks of them, made of stone, are quite clearly melted. Now, they have no idea to this day how they did that. So we have to accept that that is a lost technology. They did it somehow, and so we have to accept that. And of course, experimentation is the only way that you can really move forward, because there's no written records. I mean, in one of my books, Gods of Eden, I wrote extensively about the idea that blocks could be moved through the air. This is a tradition that you find all over the world, from Peru to Mexico amongst the Maya, to ancient Egypt, to Lebanon, to Tibet. All of these countries talk about what's quite clearly a lost technology, and often it involves sound, the use of sound.
Right.
Now, that to me is a pattern that emerges independently in all of these different places, and we can't ignore that. So we should continue to look at the possibility that you can resonate, stone to lighten its load to be able to move it in some way.
Right.
So you've got to look for patterns. That's the other important thing, patterns.
So
Right.
let me throw something at you that you might think is ridiculous, but I want to see your reaction. First of all, do you think that there are people on this planet that actually know what happened and that information is being kept secret from us? And the reason I say that is I stayed recently with a 85-year-old man in his house outside of Sedona. He's a quantum physicist who claims to have worked for the shadow government for 40 years. And he was stationed underground in some underground military bases. And he said there's a tunnel network that extends, a subterranean tunnel network that extends across the entire planet. And he said that he worked with teams that dated some of these ancient tunnels to be at minimum at least 100 million years old based on their best guess. Now, this is just information coming from this man. He's relaying it to me. And I want to see your reaction to something like that actually being possible. We're talking about something way, way, way older than any of the stuff, on the surface.
Well, I mean, obviously, I can't speak for that guy. I don't know who he is.
Right.
And therefore, as far as what he claims, I can't validate in any way. But what I can say is that there is such a thing as the Silurian hypothesis. And this was put forward by a couple of scientists as virtually a thought experiment. And basically, it goes like this. What if there was a advanced intelligence on this planet many, many millions of years ago? They may have been human, but they may have, been something else. How would we recognize their presence?
Right.
What they did was to put forward different ideas, like we'd have to look at things like ice cores, geology, for signatures of the use of metals, that obviously create smoke that eventually create like layers within the geology or within the ice cores or whatever. Just putting different ideas. And basically what they were saying is, we're not saying that there was, and to be honest, we probably could say that there probably wasn't, but if there was some kind of intelligence on this planet, this is what we should be looking for. And I think that's an incredible way of looking at it. We should always keep an open mind and to look towards finding that type of evidence, but it's got to be anatomical evidence. It's got to be something which is repeatable. In other words, if we find it and let's say it is a cave, like you're saying, then other people can go there and test it and come to a similar conclusion. Unfortunately, hearsay is no good. You would have to go inside these caves that this guy is talking about and test them in some way, find some kind of dating evidence. I mean, quite clearly, if you are talking about caves, extensive caves, the chances are that they are going to be natural. And if they are natural, then, you could get, then they could be, 100 million years old. Of course they.
Well, the reason I even thought of that, because he said he's been in them and they're as wide as 4 semis. You could, you'd fly a plane can drive through it. But he said that they're a tunnel that has been vitrified. It's vitrification, and it looked like it had been bored with an advanced technology, perfectly smooth. Not like he said, it's just hearsay. I just wanted to see what you thought about it. And
well, I mean, I'd love to see it. I mean,
of course, we all would, right?
I want all of this to be real, like you,
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, let us go down and see them.
Right.
I mean, that's where the evidence is going to come.
Exactly.
And I mean, most of my work generally involves going into dark caves and discovering things and trying to avoid big bugs and poisonous spiders. So, that's what I do for a living. So yeah, let's see these caves and then let's talk again.
Exactly. Yeah, no, right. I would just wanted your thoughts on that. But I do think that I'm excited about everything going on over Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. I think that is I think that a lot more focus should be put on those sites, because like you said, it's being extensively, rapidly excavated right now. So how much of the Karahan Tepe, percentage-wise, do you think has been excavated?
Well, the archaeologists are talking about 5%, but they also say the same at Gobekli Tepe. So to be honest, it's just a number plucked out of thin air, really. But I would imagine at the rate they're going and the area that they've got to cover is going to take 2 or 3 generations to fully uncover it. I mean, this is something that Nesmi Carroll, as the leader of these excavations, is going to be doing now for the rest of his life, I'm afraid. Well, not afraid. I mean, that's his choice. I mean, it was the same with Professor Klaus Schmidt, the discoverer of Gobekli Tepe. Once he uncovered it, he knew that was his life, that he was going to be here quite literally until he died. And he unfortunately did die in 2014, although nothing to do with Gobekli Tepe. He unfortunately had a heart attack back in Germany. But, so he was correct. So once you dedicate your life to this, that's it. And Karahan Tepe is going to tell us a hell of a lot about what the ancients were up to as much as 11 to 12,000 years ago. And that's the thing here. This is the benchmark, because we can say, look, we know that there was high civilization 12,000 years ago. We know that now. So you've got to then reflect that to what else is going on in the world. Was it the only civilization? Was there something similar going on in other parts of the world? Why was it just in this area? Why was it only in this area that they were creating these stone circles with these T-shaped pillars, all facing these 2 huge monoliths in the center? What was all that about? And why is it only within one region? Why didn't it spread to other areas? Why did it come to an end, which it did around 8000 BC, after around 1500 years, where they were building almost identical structures all the way through? Clearly, there was some cohesion in their society relating to why they had to construct these things, which by about 8000 BC was over, so they could all just go their own ways and do their own thing, basically, and create what's known as the Neolithic Revolution in other parts of the world, whether it be in Europe, whether it be in India or Central Asia or whatever. So we know that all of this was up and running by 12,000 years. We know that there was also high culture in places like Russia and Eastern Europe around 30,000 years ago. I mean, just look up the Gravatians. I mean, they were incredibly intelligent people, living in these rectangular structures, wearing beautiful tailored clothing, with incredible beads and jewelry. I mean, this was 30,000 years ago. They were even experimenting with agriculture back at that time. They seem to have been very much aware of the cycles of the moon. So, there are flowerings of high civilization or high culture, but how much more of it is there? But as I said, we have to keep our feet on the ground. Just because we see a wall that is clearly high technology doesn't necessarily mean it's 50,000 years old. It could only be a few hundred years older than the rocks above it, than the blocks above it. And as to what happened to these civilizations, we don't know, and we won't know until we have evidence of who they were. And that is the same as in Peru. I mean, clearly there were people living in Peru for many, many thousands of years. Right at this moment in Brazil, they're cutting down, the rainforest, which is obviously a terrible thing in its own right. However, what are they finding as they're doing it are these huge geometric structures made of earth. I mean, they were highlighted in the latest series of Ancient Apocalypse by Graham Hancock. And some of them are 10,000 years old.
Yeah.
And there are thousands of them. And almost certainly they stretch all the way as far as Bolivia, because, part of Bolivia is still the Amazon. And of course, what have you got in Bolivia? You have Tiwanaku, the incredible civilization city of Tiwanaku, with its Pumapunka complex, which is one of the most mind-blowing sites on this earth as far as architecture is concerned. Now, we know that Pumapunka was probably built towards the end of the activity going on at Tiwanaku, but was it influenced by activity that had been taking place there for at least 10,000 years, maybe more? I mean, there are theories that Tiwanaku goes back 10, 15,000 years, but it's like a big jigsaw, and you've got to put it all together in the right order. That's the important thing.
Right. Have you seen the recent LiDAR images of the Amazon where there's multiple structures under the forest that, we're just now learning about? So it was clearly inhabited.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have similar structures like that all over North America, huge geometrical structures like at places like Hopewell in Ohio, Portsmouth, Ohio, and many other places. And for many decades, it was assumed that this mound building culture had developed in some places like Ohio and then moved south into Alabama and Florida, etc. But we now know it's the opposite, that the mound building cultures of North America begin in the south, in South America, and then move up into North America. So everything's changing on that front as well. So a lot of the cities, the ritual complexes of North America were the product of a culture that has come in from the south. The oldest mounds, for instance, in North America, in Alabama, are 10,000 years old. So, I mean, this is extraordinary stuff. So what's being uncovered now in Amazon is helping us to understand who this lost civilization may actually be and when they were around.
Right. Yeah, I think it's fascinating. And I live 25 minutes from the Cahokia Mounds. You might be familiar with that. We actually did we've done our own documentary on that site, and it's impressive, really. Once you're there walking around and looking at it, like instead of looking at the photos, it's really impressive. But there seems to be a connection with South America, definitely, or Central America. And, maybe even the same people. We could be talking about migration, eventually migrating north, like the macaw feathers. There's just weird things that shouldn't be there. They're here.
The Birdman tablet.
Right.
I mean, you got Monk's Mound, that the base is bigger than the Great Pyramid, with, what was it, over 3 feet of compacted granite on the bottom that could only have come from like 100 miles away.
Yeah.
At the least. There's all these things that, are crazy.
So how can somebody visit Karahan Tepe today, or is it closed while they're excavating?
No, you go there. It's open to visitors. So what that means is that there is a little visitor center there, You can go there for free right now, which is, to be honest, the time you should be doing it, because I think within a year, maybe two, it's going to be closed, probably for an entire year, and they will put not just a roof on it, but a whole glass walkway through it. So they'll completely destroy the ambience of the place. I mean, all right, you'll maybe able to get closer to some of the features than you did before, but it's going to ruin things like astronomical alignments and stuff like that, because they don't believe in that sort of thing. I'm afraid, as far as they're concerned, it's all bunkum. It's not real.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, this is one of the problems that we have. I mean, the archaeologists over there are trying their best to almost say the equal and opposite to what the alternative, historians are saying about Karahan Tepe or Gobekli Tepe. But yeah, I mean, you can go there now if you want to go, and if you want to go to Gobekli Tepe, you just take a flight to Istanbul to Şanlıurfa in the eastern part of the country, get yourself a hotel there, and get yourself a guide, and they'll take you around all of these sites. This is the time to do it, really. It's an exciting time. There's new sites opening up, like Sayburj. That's another huge complex that they're investigating right now. That's just a few miles west of Şanlıurfa. And there are up to 12 of these so-called Taş Tepeler sites that are officially recognized, but the archaeologists suggest there could be anything up to 40, and one suggested there could be as many as 100, and that's all in this one region. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, get yourself out there. I mean, obviously we do tours there twice a year. I say we, me, Hugh Newman, as part of the Megalithomania team. And yeah, I mean, come with us. I mean, all the details are on andrewcollins.com or megalithomania.co.uk. And I mean, we've been doing it for years. We know all the places, we know how to get to these sites, and they're voyages of discovery, really. They're not just, you don't go there to sit on a beach for a week. You know what I mean? Right. We're going to sites. Sometimes we have to, wait for exactly the right time to go to them. And it's quite exciting to be able to do this, particularly now. I mean, Gobekli Tepe is now as commercial as Stonehenge. You have to get a minibus to go to the site. As I say, you pay €26 or whatever it is for entry for the site. There's a walkway all around it. You can't veer off of that, I'm afraid, anymore. So now is the time to go to Karahan if you really want to do it, because in a few years' time, that will be exactly the same as Gobekli Tepe.
Yeah, that was Machu Picchu in Peru and other places. Nikki has been there pre-COVID, where nothing was roped off at all. You could just wander around, touch whatever you want to go. Now it's all roped off. Yeah. They have all these signs saying you can't touch things, you can't go in certain places. You have to have a guide that takes you, like, you can't just go on your own. There's all these things that they try to,
Yeah, I know. It's the same in Egypt. From what I understand, it's the same in Easter Island. We're going there next year.
Nice.
So yeah, they've just used it as an excuse, really, to rope these places off and make life easier for themselves, really. And the other problem is imagery and release of information. They want to be the only ones that are able to tell you what's going on.
Right.
They want to be the only ones that will release photographs or videos of them. And they get very, very upset about you taking photographs at some of these places, and particularly videos. And drones are a complete no-no. I mean, the status of an archaeological site in Turkey is the same as a military base. So you might as well be flying a drone over, secret aircraft. It's got exactly the same consequences, which is arrest.
That happened. So Mike Collins from Wandering Wolf, during COVID, he went down to, I can't remember the site, but he flew a drone, not understanding the rules, and he got some amazing footage. He got caught and reprimanded, and they actually took his footage, but he had it backed up, or it was being simultaneously backed up, or whatever it was. And he put it online anyway, and Ancient Aliens actually bought the footage from him.
That was the footage that Ancient Aliens used?
Yeah, they use it now. and he got it technically illegally, but it was the best drone footage of the site because no one was allowed to get drone footage.
Because he's the only one that probably got drone footage.
Right.
No, that's exactly the situation. I mean, quite clearly, if you can get out of the country with it, that's great. But you run an incredible risk when you're actually taking it. And particularly at, let's say, Karahan Tepe, you've got these huge cameras on the end of poles now, and they can zoom in on you anything up to about a mile. So they know exactly what you are doing. I mean, it is really Big Brother type stuff there,
Wow.
I'm afraid.
Crazy.
I mean, as I said, some of these new sites that are opening up haven't got any of that. So it's the time to try and track them down and go to them. Gobekli Tepe is just a commercial place now. Great. I mean, you know, it's great to go, great to see it, great to experience it. But the rawness of the site has now gone, really.
Yeah. I'm interested.
Karahan Tepe, you know, I would say to people, get there within the next couple of years. Otherwise, it's going to be either like Gobekli or it will be closed for a year, maybe even 2.
Right. Yeah. I'm all about
before that happens. Right.
I'm all about the rawness. I mean, there's an excitement to that too, because there's still that potential discovery. Like you know, it's being excavated and you might find something, you know, you never know. It just gives you that feeling like it's not a tourist attraction yet.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
I mean, the same thing happened. I mean, what happens on our tours. I mean, some of our group members really do make genuine discoveries when we're at these sites. I mean, for instance, we went into the Şanlıurfa Archaeological Museum where there are thousands of artifacts from Gobekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, the other sites involved. And one of our tour group members was looking at this little bone plaque in one of the cases. And he sort of turned away, he said, doesn't that show T-pillars from, it was found at Gobekli Tepe, doesn't it actually show 2 T-pillars with a figure in the middle? And we sort of looked, myself and you, Newman, looked at it and we thought, oh my God, it does. And the archaeologists had not recognized this. And because we were basically filming it at the time, we had the footage. Hugh put out a video of it. It's out there somewhere, Megalithomania. And we did articles about it. And the whole story went totally viral. Absolutely. And it forced the archaeologists to have to respond. And basically they said, oh, nothing to see here. Or it's just the feet of a lizard or something, which was just ridiculous. I mean, anybody looking at this bone plaque now, and you know what they did? They actually turned it over so that nobody could see it. So that, you know, they just had it there with just blank back. I mean, it was just ridiculous. I mean, just have a go at us. They have turned it now back over on the right way, but that was only for the first time that I've seen it that way in a while, for about 2 or 3 years, maybe longer. Well, no longer. It was, you know, they turned it over so that you couldn't see it anymore. So they can be petty, I'm afraid, but that was a genuine discovery, and it was an extraordinary one. You know, we found lost stones at sites, you know, made observations. Obviously, this whole idea of the pillar shrine at Karahan being a snake's head came from what one of the ladies said on the tours. You know, could it not be a human sperm? I mean, she was definitely along the right lines, but I think that it's much more likely to be a snake head. You know, and behind it, it's got this deep groove and this raised area that clearly is meant to represent the neck and the body of the snake. I mean, it's incredible. And once you realise that, you can't undo that thought. Once you realise that it's the head and neck of a snake.
I saw it. I was there, in the Temple of the Moon. I was like, wow, there's a giant snake on the side of this. Wall.
And that's right. That's the
There
power of doing tours, bringing in new people and new eyes, new perspectives, and new minds on this stuff, because you just never know. But if you isolate it and you kind of get this group think going, and it's like this echo chamber in a way, you kind of create your own narrative. You decide on that, and then you're closed off to new ideas, and then you back yourself into a corner, and then you get to the point where you're scared of new information to where you're literally turning over stones. So people can't expand their mind.
Such a vested interest that anything else is a threat that you have to just
Yeah. Well, I mean, on our tours, we have engineers, we have builders, we have geologists. people from various different skills that we haven't got, and I mean, I'm just a writer ultimately. My background's journalism. So when you've got somewhere like an engineer, they can tell you, for instance, they can look at enclosure, and even though the archaeologists are saying, that these T-pillars are simply for roofs, they'll say that's complete rubbish. If you put a roof on that, it would, put too much pressure on the stones, it would collapse. It's too thin at the bottom. I mean, stuff which is beyond us to actually make that type of observation. And a geologist, we took a geologist to Karahan Tepe, and he looked at the weathering immediately above the pillar shrine, and he said that's caused by water, and that's had water in it. In other words, they were filling the interiors of these enclosures with water, almost certainly for some representation of this cosmic ocean, so that they could get the reflections of the stones and stuff like this. So you think, my God, that's an interesting idea. So as I said, you get people like that along on your tours, you're going to learn more all the time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
exactly.
this has been fantastic. Thank you for joining us, and mention your websites one more time for the audience, and how they can book a tour with you.
Yeah. I mean, we go twice a year to Turkey in May and September. The May one is general. We do, all the Hittite sites. We do Cappadocia and all the pharaoh chimneys. We go obviously to Gobekli Tepe, Karahan. We go out east to the beautiful city of Mardin. But then in September, we go to the east of the country. We start off essentially at Gobekli Tepe and then go east. And we go to places like Mount Ararat and the Noah's Ark and Lake Van and the rest of it. So all the details are on the website, andrewcollins.com, which has also got loads of great articles about all the subjects that we've been talking about today. It's obviously got all my social media links. And the book, Karahan Tepe, Civilization of the Annunaki, and the cosmic origins of the Serpent of Eden. By the way, the Serpent of Eden, I think, is a memory of these communications that were going on at Karahan Tepe with this Milky Way serpent, this world encircling serpent, and the knowledge and the wisdom that was coming from it. But that's all in the book. So yeah, that's it really. So this is the time. This is the time of discovery. I mean, it's exciting. It really is exciting with all these discoveries being made. And I'm so glad that this subject is almost becoming popular within, modern day culture. I mean, it is. It's becoming the subject of rock stars and all the rest of it. It's the time to get into this subject right now, really.
Yeah. I mean,
Absolutely.
people are craving new info. I mean, they know a piece of the puzzle is missing. And people are asking questions now more than ever. And like you said, it's becoming common talk where it used to be taboo. And that's important. Yeah. That's important because now our children are being born into a world where these conversations are already being had, and they don't have to be, it opens the minds. It allows them to open their minds at a young age. And then who knows what they'll discover.
And with the internet, it's so much easier to access this type of information than it was pre-internet too. It spreads around way quicker, and
exactly.
It's a different time now.
Mm-hmm.
And you got Keanu Reeves now on the season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, which is amazing.
You got Neo himself,
right,
all up,
right, exactly.
Well, thank you for joining us. This has been a pleasure, and we look forward to seeing the new episodes of Ancient Aliens. And best of luck in all your future endeavors with what you're doing with these ancient sites. And thank you again for all this. It was great.
Cheers, guys. It's been my pleasure.
Yep. All right, guys. Thank you all for tuning in. Like I always say, we can't do this without you. Your love and support means everything. So we truly appreciate that. And until next time, have a great evening. Good night. Hello, and welcome to Conference Bone. If you know the name of the conference you'd like to attend, press 1.
Come on.
Using your touch-tone keypad, please enter the first 3 letters of the conference title now. You've selected Secret Space Conference? If that is correct, press 1.
What?
You've selected full disclosure now. If this is correct, press 1. Why don't you just tell me the name of the conference you'd like to attend?
Rebels of Disclosure?
To find the venue nearest you, please enter your 5-digit zip code now. Why don't you just tell me where you want to attend the conference?
Pierre Marquette Lodge and Conference Center?
Rebels of Disclosure is playing at the Pierre Marquette Lodge and Conference Center in Grafton, Illinois, May 12th through 15th, 2025.
Yeah, now I got you.
If you would like to purchase tickets, please visit journeytotruth.online now.